Hello everybody. I'm Sharad Mahajan. My purpose of being here is to introduce this webinar, this particular session, and also to give information about the organization. Well, these webinars are organized by INHAF, that is India Habitat Forum. It's started in late 90s, and architect Kirtibhai Shah is the president of the same. We started somewhere in 90s with the idea that there were people working in development fields, in architecture field, and they are concerned about various issues, and the issues are also related to policies. So we thought that there should be a pan-India forum where we could work on policies level, and people working in different silos with NGOs or professionals or researchers or academicians, they should come together, share the ideas, and make this platform vibrant. That was the purpose, and we had done wonderful work in last couple of years. Now this idea of a webinar came in COVID period, but it is not because of COVID only we have been working on these issues. Before that also we have been thinking that housing is not in isolation, transportation is not in isolation, urban finance is not in isolation. All these things are connected with each other. Now, and that's why this idea came that we will have the series of webinar where we will call the expert, national, international experts and people who have done the actual work on the ground and debate on the particular issues. So we have taken different themes, and this particular webinar is about transportation. But this idea of webinar is basically a part of our efforts called CoE-UT, that is Citizen Urban Initiative. It's about multi-level and multidisciplinary societal efforts spearheaded by some of the India's leading urban and related professionals, development thinkers, and practitioners to work on a blueprint that outlines the country's response to the complex urban challenges in a way that ensures productive, inclusive, sustainable, livable, and human cities for a happy people and equitable and harmonious society. It's a big task, but that is what we feel that this platform should address to it. And this is a very challenging, and how do we do it? So we came up with the idea of 30 webinars, and this is the 21st of it. We have successfully completed 20 this thing, and its relevance is more felt because of the COVID, where many people have started thinking that the issues are connected and they need to be addressed holistically. The proposed webinars are seen as opening the much needed social dialogue on how we handle the urbanization process and develop cities so that they remain engines of economic growth minus the exploitative instinct elements and systems. People, particularly the working class, environmental and nature. To cut the story short, let me revoke the famous Panchashil declaration of the kind of the cities we want, and that is a dream, but yes, utopian dream. But it's the declaration is very clear that we want the cities economically productive, socially just, politically participatory, environmentally sustainable, and culturally vibrant. These are the city we dream of. Technology adaptive while being people centric also. So this is our objective, this is our goal, this is our dream, and the webinars are woven in that fashion. Now here under CEPT, we have the theme about transportation, and we have seen that in all around the world, the nicest cities are not the one which are very rich, very smart, but they have sorted out their transportation issues very well. So, which is about the public transport, private transport, whatever it is, but it works very well. And the cities, at least in India, we have where the pollution is too much, the traffic jams are too much, they have many accidents, and it's very stressful to be on the road. And there are this particular webinar, we have the experts who will be who have done a lot of work in this field. particularly on public transportation, and it will be anchored by Dr. Abhijit Lokre, who is the founder of Urban Lab. It's a private consulting firm working on these issues on various cities, and of course he will introduce you the galaxy of the speakers who have done the works nationally, internationally. Over to you, Abhijit. Abhijit, over to you, please.
Yeah, thanks, Sharad. And a very warm welcome to all of you, all the panelists, and all the people in the audience. It's very nice to have all of you here. Before I start, I would like to thank Kirtiji. Kirtiji and I have been working for the last, I think, 3 years now. Kirtiji, 4 years probably. And, he has convinced me to look at BRT in a different way. And I hope I have convinced him to look at BRTS in a different way, right? So let me begin by introducing our panelists. I'll start with Manjula ma'am. And, I really wanted her to be here. I have been working with ma'am, I think, since 2011 when we started working on the Hubli Dharwad BRTS. And, she's one government officer I have seen who gets down to every small detail and leaves nothing unturned to get the best thing possible. I mean, the BRTS now, the public bicycle sharing in Mysore, it has been a great experience working with her. So, a very warm welcome to you, ma'am. Thanks for accepting my request. Next, Sam Zimmerman from the World Bank. Sam and I also came in touch when we were working on the Hubli Dharwad BRTS. And, Sam is someone who has traveled the world. He has seen, I think, most of the BRTS around the world. There's a wealth of knowledge about what works in BRTS, what doesn't, based on his experiences. Thanks, Sam, for being here today. It's early morning in DC, so thanks very much. Next, I'll come to Professor Swamy. Sir, thank you for being here. It has been a long journey. In BRTS, we have worked together on so many projects, created so many wonderful projects. And I think we need to do something more now. I think the time has come to take this to the next level. BRTS is unfinished agenda. And let's do something worthwhile now out of this.
Let's hope so. Yeah, with Madam around, with Sam and all of them guiding, yes, we should be able to. Yeah, thank you.
I would like to welcome Professor Geetam Tiwari. With Professor Tiwari, it's a very interesting story because the way I came into BRTS is when I first heard her present something on the high capacity bus system of Delhi. This was long back. I don't think she would remember also. This was in Manesar near Gurgaon. She had presented on the high capacity bus system. And I was so, I was young, just starting out in my career. And I was so captured by what she shared that next time I was in Delhi, I made it a point to take an appointment and go and meet her at IIT Delhi. So, so it's a very old association with her. She was also part of my dissertation panel on during my PhD. So, thanks very much, Professor, for being here today. Let's also welcome Madhav. So Madhav and I also go back a long way. Kind of started working on BRTS together in India, I think probably 2005 or 6, Madhav. And, we collaborated in Indore on the BRTS. And I'm sure Madhav is going to share very interesting stories about Indore and how they, kind of got into the system to make a difference there. Right. So welcome, Madhav. Nice to have you here. And Pranjali. Thanks, Pranjali. Pranjali for accepting that last minute request to come in place of Sujit. Unfortunately, Sujit cannot be with us today because he is having some health issues. He's fine, but he's not able to join because of that. Pranjali also has, and I go back a long way, she has kind of been responsible for a lot of the good work that has happened in Pune and Pimpri Chinchwad. She is also part of the Pune Rainbow BRT committee. And she has done a lot of work, from the NGO side to push for good public transport, to push for the BRTS. And we have shared a lot of stories together on BRTS. So I'm sure She will have a lot of things to say today. So again, very warm welcome to all of you. The way we are going to do this is I'm going to have a brief 15-20 minute presentation on the current status of BRTS in India. And then I'm going to have questions for the panelists. So I'm not going to go in any particular order. I'm going to kind of have questions and then have a debate around them, asking each one of you to contribute wherever I think you can. And then I'm going to, so there are already questions coming in from the participants. So in the last part of the session, then I'm going to also have questions from the participants, from the attendees, and I'll have those questions for the panelists also. Okay, so good. So let's start, and I'll start with the presentation first. Yeah, and we are talking about BRTS, the unfinished agenda. And for me, it's unfinished, it's personal, because, you know, I started off my career by, you know, getting into BRTS and joining CEPT. And, you know, the first initial years were very exciting. We did a lot of work. And then over the last 6-7 years, probably things have cooled down. BRTS, there are no new BRTS coming in. There is more and more focus on the metro and other varieties and variants of the metro. So let's look at why it is unfinished during this session. Before that, let's look at what is the status of BRTS in India. Okay, so we are going to look at the start of the BRTS, the rise, what is the present concern, the decline or the losing interest in the BRTS currently, and then the rise of the metro. So if you look at the start, sometime in 2003 and maybe even before that, you know, Delhi was, I think, probably the first city which started looking at BRTS, or what IIT Delhi at that time called the high capacity bus system. About 150 kilometers of HCBS in Delhi. Ahmedabad was also seriously looking at a BRTS instead of a metro. And in the first DPR that was prepared, there was about 216 kilometers of network plan. Pune was also interested. And, you know, at around that time, in around 2004 and 5, we had Enrique Peñalosa come to India, I think a couple of times or maybe 3 times. And he presented the BRTS concept in Delhi, in Pune, and in Ahmedabad to a lot of decision makers. The end result being all 3 cities decided to go ahead with implementing the BRTS. Fortunately, at around the same time, the JNNURM was launched. It was an urban infrastructure program by the Ministry of Urban Development. And what was the good thing about NURM was that because it came in 2006 with the NUTP, the central government, the MOUD, said that if cities wanted funds to improve their traffic and transport infrastructure, they would have to build BRTS and not simply widen the roads or build flyovers. And this was a very important point in BRTS journey in India, because now cities which wanted access to funds also had to conform to the NUTP. And the ministry was very clear that they had to, if they wanted money for building public transport, it had to be BRTS. The JNNURM funded 11 bus systems between 2005 to 2013. And there were other bus systems. For example, Delhi was funded by the Delhi government itself. And there were a couple of other systems which were funded by the World Bank. It was also in this period from about 2006 to 2013 that there were multiple seminars and workshops in India. So I think almost every UMI during this time had sessions on BRTS. Ahmedabad hosted 2 Asia BRTS workshops and seminars. There were multiple trips to BRTS cities outside India by cities that were interested in going there. After the completion of BRTS in India, there were multiple visits from cities outside India to see what we have done. So I remember in Ahmedabad, we hosted many, many cities from outside India. So all in all, this period from 2005 to 2013 saw a lot of activity around BRTS. if you look at how the BRTS actually went on, now there may be, the figures may be up and down here and there, but more or less, starting from 2006, when Pune first started its pilot corridor, all the way till Hubli-Dharwad, 22 kilometers in 2018, many cities built, some of them expanded. But if you notice from around 2009 onwards, after Ahmedabad and then Rajkot, Bhopal, Indore, Pune, Surat, Amritsar, Naya Raipur, and then Hubli Dharwad. So a lot of cities built and expanded their systems. But it was also sometime after 2010 that there were some concerns around the BRTS. First was that only 3 cities actually expanded beyond the first corridor. These were Ahmedabad, Pune, and Surat. For various reasons, other cities did not expand. Many times, in some of the cities, for example, like Amritsar, they had planned for 32 kilometers and they built the 32 kilometers. Or Hubli Dharwad planned for 22 and they built the 22. They did not have plans for anything more. But the other cities like Rajkot or Jaipur or Bhopal, even Indore, actually had submitted plans to JNNURM for much larger networks, but they never expanded. If you look at these maps, Ahmedabad was among the 3 cities that expanded, tried to cover most of the city. Bhopal had just 1 corridor. Even this corridor ran in unsegregated lanes, or basically did not have segregation in some part. And Indore also had just 11 or 12 kilometers. Though it had plans, and it had pretty ambitious plans, even to redevelop the canal and to build a BRTS along the canal, but they never did it. Literature also suggested that there were some elements missing in some of these systems. For example, Delhi did not have off-board ticketing or level alighting. You could always debate whether these are required or not, but let's go through some of these. Bhopal, in some cases, did not have unsegregated bus lanes. Ahmedabad never integrated with the AMTS. It still has not integrated with the existing bus service, that is the Ahmedabad Municipal Transport Service. Last mile connectivity remains a problem with most cities. So these were the other issues. Elements were missing in many of these cities. Delhi's pilot corridor ran into a lot of legal issues. So there were petitions, and the High Court initially allowed other vehicles to get inside, and then later they said no, other vehicles cannot get inside. And then after the Delhi government changed and the AAP government came in, after some study they decided to dismantle the corridor. Indore had other issues. Again, somebody went to the High Court, and the High Court initially passed a judgment which disallowed, basically allowed all other vehicles to come inside the corridor. And this was a protracted case. It went on for a lot of time. Basically, this killed off any interest in Indore to expand the system. So even now, today, other vehicles are not allowed in the BRTS corridor, and the single corridor performs fairly efficiently. The Indore authorities are not willing to expand. Jaipur, which started a pilot corridor, decided not to build any more BRT because of the bad or the negative press that Delhi received. In fact, Jaipur said that they would not build a BRT corridor on any road which is less than 40 meters right of way. And then if you looked at Jaipur's map and tried to figure out which roads were actually less than 40 meters or rather more than 40 meters right of way, there were roads on the outskirts of the city where the BRTS would not have made sense. Initially, the media was very positive, especially in Ahmedabad. After the inauguration, there was a lot of good positive coverage. They talked about green revolution. They talked about imposing penalties for street parking. And then slowly the narrative changed sometime around 2013, 2014. And then it began about the metro and that the corridors are empty. The BRTS has failed and nobody wants to get onto the BRTS. And even fairly recently, there have been a lot of negative coverage about the BRTS. And now with the COVID coming in, the ridership has also gone down. So overall, the narrative, the role of media has changed for the BRTS. This is another example. There was a report in the newspapers which said that BRTS takes away 35% of the road space for just 1% of the traffic. This was a study done in Gujarat by the State Traffic Board. And when you actually look at it and kind of break down the numbers, that's not true at all. We did a very quick exercise to understand for different right-of-ways what really happens. And we figured out that the maximum the BRTS actually took away was about 37% on a 30-meter right-of-way. And in fact, in most cases, the other traffic actually got back better facilities than they had earlier. But somehow public memory was very short. And as soon as congestion started increasing there, the empty BRTS lanes attracted a lot of attention. We had articles which questioned that the BRTS causes congestion. And I always used to tell people that whenever you see congestion, don't look right at the BRTS lane, look left and you will figure out why there is congestion. This is a before and after photograph of Ahmedabad, where after there was a parking drive about a couple of years back, miraculously, there was no congestion because all the parked vehicles actually went away. And then there was no talk about congestion because of BRT. So ridership started stagnating. Ahmedabad is stagnated for some time now. Indore has kind of touched its peak, but it's not going to go above that because they're not expanding. So ridership has stagnated. After 2013, no city has actually planned for a BRTS. There has been no new DPR, no new request for funding. Many cities have actually built flyovers all along the BRTS corridor, which actually defeats the very purpose of BRTS. Most cities, Pune, Ahmedabad, Surat, Indore, you say any city, they have actually built flyovers along the BRTS corridor, which means it's actually faster to use your own vehicle. Nobody's going to come on the BRT. In fact, now many cities are building metros along the BRTS corridor. In Pune, some of the BRTS corridors and bus stations have actually been dismantled to build metros. And many more cities, many more BRT cities are now planning or they are now implementing metro systems. So interest has gone. People want to actually build metros now. One of the things that I always say is simply building a BRTS is not going to attract passengers. You need to have enabling policies. The National Urban Transport Policy did talk about some of them. And the JNNURM funding also had some of these criteria built in, that cities need to have a parking policy. But most cities did not implement these support policies. More than the lack of funding, once JNNURM was over in 2014, cities did not actually go and seek other sources of funding. For example, Hubli, Dharwad and Naya Raipur got funds from the World Bank under the Sustainable Urban Transport Project along with the MOUD to build their BRTS. But other than that, there have been no other sources of funding, and cities themselves have really not gone and searched for sources of funding. And this is around the same time that the metro has started rising. If you look at the development of the metro, Kolkata was the first one, but it was really Delhi that kind of took off after 1998. And now there is a craze for metros. Many cities are expanding, construction and planning happening in many cities. And I'm sure these are not the only cities. Every day we hear about new cities thinking of BRTS. Indore, Bhopal, Meerut. I have heard Allahabad and Gorakhpur also now talking about a metro. The ministry is also talking about Metro Light, which is more like an LRT in some part of Delhi. So there is a lot of emphasis now on metro development. There are supportive policies to build a metro. There is a metro policy, there is a metro act. Central government is reserving funds to build metro. There is central assistance for building the metro. And there is a lot of positive discourse around the metro. The government will encourage Make in India with metro rail projects. There is an effective metro rail policy. So, in a sense, it has completely turned around 10 years later. Now, the positive discourse is all about the metro and how the metro is now going to save our public transport. So this is the journey of the BRTS since say about 2003, 2004 till 2020, 17, 18 years. And this is where we have reached now. So this kind of leads us to certain questions. And we are going to answer some of these questions, or we're going to debate some of these questions today. One is, what are the reasons for BRTS not working in India? And I'm going to kind of open the floor for our panelists now. And let's start with Manjula ma'am. So ma'am, I'm going to stop sharing, and if we can have everybody back. Yeah. So the first question that we are looking at, ma'am, is, does BRTS really have a future in India? Yeah, I think, ma'am, you're on mute. You'll have to unmute. You have to unmute, ma'am. I think somebody from INHAF will have to allow them to unmute. Radhika?
Manjula ma'am, we are asking to unmute yourself. Kindly click on that notification. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So, Abhijit, that's a very difficult question that you are asking.
That's why I
Is there
started
a
with
future
you.
for BRTS? See, in the best of times, it was difficult to convince people to go for implementation of bus rapid transit system rather than metro, because BRTS takes space, right? Road space. So most people we have been talking to are people who travel by their own personal vehicles. So generally, they never wanted or never liked the idea of a bus system taking away road space that should rightfully belong to them. So we always, even while planning for Hubli Dharwad, we encountered a lot of opposition at various levels, including within the government. Mainly because everybody said, why do you want to? Number one, is BRTS required? Is there a requirement for a separate dedicated road space for buses? After all, buses have been plying between Hubli and Dharwad in the past also, and they will do so in future. Do we require a dedicated corridor at all? Why do we need to spend so much money? So and then within the Hubli Dharwad also a lot of, at the political level, etc., with certain notable exceptions, the issue was, how will our vehicles move? And if you take away the space and you have the buses moving, and if and they have a dedicated corridor, but we need to stop. So this was the narrative that was going on. But I think, BRTS also needs to, so when we actually have to come back to how do we define BRTS? So what I've seen is that, the implementation of bus rapid transit system in Hubli and Dharwad has, at least in Karnataka, we have got a little positive impact of that, in the sense, today a bus priority lane is, actually done, made, constructed on the outer ring road, though it was kind of it was required because of the fact that construction of metro is going on the outer ring road, but it has been constructed and people surprisingly have accepted it. There is a lot of positive kind of a vibe about the priority lane. And I feel, and incidentally, there are people who have also said, including politicians, why not have it this priority lane in the center of the road? Because when you have it on the left side, then there are issues of access and planning for access to, various IT companies and others located there. So people have also started citing the example and saying, why, unlike Hubli and Dharwad, you're putting it on the left side, and why don't you have it on the central side? So I think what we need to look at is maybe demystify BRTS and say that, there are other various variants of BRTS, and Professor Swamy, I know, has used to talk about BRTS Lite, and look at basically giving priority to buses. And that can happen in various ways. So we may have to expand the narrative and talk about getting this, priority. Because in small cities, you can't start talking about BRTS because then the lane will be empty. But can you have priority lanes at different points of time? Maybe we need to make those beginnings like that. Probably not continuous day priority lane, but maybe for certain duration, it is a peak hour, it's a priority lane. So I think we need to start that experimentation. Probably somewhere we got fixated and said BRTS means all these elements. It should have flap gates, it should have all that, and that becomes very difficult for smaller mid cities to afford. So probably we need to look at what element is very essential, mandatory, and maybe start from there. And if we change that narrative, I think there would be takers. And I would like to mention that recently from DULT, we also threw up a challenge. We said, cities on the move, where there is a way, where there is a bus, there is a way. And we have got nice kind of a response from our public transport operators in the cities. And we are hoping that, whatever priority lane we are doing it in Bangalore, we will be in a position to replicate it in two-tier cities. That is what one is looking at, because these are the cities on which we need to invest for the future. So I don't think I have really answered your question because I can't really predict whether there is a future or not. But I think definitely there is a future for buses. Nobody can say there isn't. So we need to also plan priority, keeping in view the city and the budget and various things. And that is my take on it.
Yeah, I think that's useful. So basically, demystifying the BRTS and making it simpler and making it adaptable for smaller cities is it's almost like reinventing the BRTS now in a different way. Yeah, I think Professor Swamy, I think, has been talking about this for some time now, about, as ma'am said, about the BRTS light concept or partial segregation. So, sir, you want to add to that? What is this concept about BRTS light that ma'am talked about?
I think Madam said it all. My BRT is my city bus. Essentially, BRT need not necessarily have all the elements what we are talking about. Segregation all through is not necessary. I think, when we initially introduced BRT in India, we probably made a strategic error. It's a mistake, I think. We attempted to pitch it against metro, and then along with those things, we also had all this platinum, gold, silver rated BRTs and all of that kind of a thing. I think we got lost in that whole agenda. I think what we needed to do, and I think it's time that I think what Madam is trying to say, is to rethink on it, and we need to say bus is the basic necessity, and it cannot compete with other vehicles today because it needs its own space to maintain a certain pace of mobility, speeds, and only way you can do it is to have a priority, and therefore the BRT has to be better bus and my city bus. I think that is the whole issue. That is the kind of a light BRT system which we have all been talking about. But then I would like to go one step forward and take cue from what is happening in Surat and what Madam had thought about and is in the process of implementing in Hubli Dharwad. That is all this integrated bus systems. Right now we are talking about one corridor, one system, few kilometers, and I think that is not the way to look at it. We need to integrate the bus system, which is something which is faster, something which is not so fast, but small systems, physically and fair and all those things integrated. I think that probably is the way forward rather than just sticking to the standard design-based solutions. We need to adapt solutions to physical places where we are putting that together. Sole objective has to be, it could have micro buses, it could have mini buses, it could have standard buses, articulated. It's not the type of the bus, it's not the number of people it needs to move. What it needs to move is connect people across wherever they need to go through bus systems. In fact, Surat bus system reaches to at least 500 meters of all the 100% population there in Surat. I think that we need to recognize. And if you already have that, The question next comes like, what kind of a feeder do we need and feeder for what? We need short distance trips for a different kind of a purpose, but not necessarily a bus. Bus becomes first mile and the last mile. I think that is the way to design. That is the way to think. That's the way to move forward. I think we can come back and discuss more, but and this is my view.
Yeah. Thanks, sir.
Just to conclude, my BRT is my city bus.
Yeah. I remember.
And it is integrated bus system. Yeah.
Okay, so let's kind of zoom out a little bit and talk to Sam and get his perspective on what Manjula ma'am and Professor had said.
It's called Bus Sam, just for your information.
The other one, Sam the bus.
Sam the bus.
Sam the bus, yeah. So Sam, in your experience of having seen many BRTS around the world and Latin America, where it kind of seems to have done better than other continents, is your experience the same with what both of them are suggesting, where you did not have everything, it did not be 5-star, but you kind of adapt it to the city and the context and it will work? What's your take on that?
Well, first of all, I've never heard Professor Swamy or Manjula ma'am say anything I didn't agree with 1,000%. That's number one. And it's thinking that's not unique to India. It's thinking that applies everywhere. But if I could just mention about this, there are a whole bunch of issues that we've gone over. And I think we've gone over it peripherally. And one of the lessons that I learned early on in public transport planning, I mean, 55 years ago when I had my first public transport planning job, I'm sorry to say, start with the problem, not the solution. Have a process that begins with understanding, and you hit it on the nose in the perspective of Ahmedabad congestion. What's the cause of the problem and what are the available solutions? Certainly in some places, not all, metro works. In other places, it is a waste of money. And I don't want to focus too much on metros, but in research for this session, I looked at the success of metro in Jaipur, Nagpur, Kochi, Lucknow, and I wonder if anybody in the central government or elsewhere is having a similar seminar trying to figure out whether there's a future for metros in India on the basis of success thus far in those places. Everywhere is not Delhi, Calcutta, Bangalore, or Mumbai. But I think the process by which we plan public transport in India, and let me add we, because I've spent more time in India than any other place outside the US, other than Mexico and Canada, and of course I love it. Number one, the process is usually carried out as a one-off step, if you will. One of the biggest problems I've noted with respect to BRT is that there is no unique institution that really cares about BRT. What's the institution responsible for planning public transport, irrespective of mode? Professor Swamy mentioned integration. How do you integrate a bus system within itself and with metro, suburban rail, if there's no institution that actually cares over a long run? And in almost every case for BRTS in India, as an observer, one of the big issues at the end, we sort of began construction, was who's going to run it? Well, isn't that a fundamental issue? The other thing is, I think there's still confusion about what constitutes BRTS, which is why a lot of people, and I think Professor Swamy drove this internationally, refers to BRTS as a better bus system. What are the elements that you want in a bus system? And one or more of them come together, of course, in a BRT system. But thinking about buses, the bus network, as an integrated system is one way to begin successful implementation of whatever you want to call BRTS. There isn't BRT out here and then everything else. part of the whole. And if you can't do a good job with the whole, I went into the BRTS data set and I noticed that Delhi was shown as 6 kilometers. Well, what system in the world is 6 kilometers long in a city of 22 million people? And the answer is none. BRT is not, whether it's Butterbus or some other definition, is not segregated lanes. And yet we are describing BRT as the length of some either segregated lane or perhaps dedicated service. So my point is, number one, let's start with the problem before we select a solution, whether it's metro, whether it's BRT. I think it's particularly important for BRT because of the flexibility of the mode. There are an almost infinite variety of combinations and permutations of what you can do to improve buses in a corridor. So to begin with gold standard, silver standard, and I think that's just total nonsense. To begin with that is belying the fact that we really don't understand what the problem is. So that's number one. The other thing is, I think we have to establish, and in your list of questions, I saw legal, technical, public engagement, political. I don't know where this fits, but what about institutions? Governance. If you don't have an institution between, if you will, getting money, making investment decisions, and an institution that's responsible for all outcomes of investment decisions, not one mode, I think you're destined to fail. And when I read the newspapers last night, and frankly, I usually read the Times of India and the Hindustan Times, so this was catch-up football from me. In almost every one of those metro cases I mentioned, Lucknow, Jaipur, Nagpur, Kochi, the articles about the miserable performance, and it is a miserable performance by anybody's standards compared to forecasts, spending billions of dollars, who knows how many crore, to get that low ridership. Almost every one of them said, we need feeders. And I would answer, no, you don't. You need an integrated public transport system in which everything does its share of getting people from where they are to where they want to go. Feeders, quote unquote, shouldn't be an afterthought, because if you're in an integrated, better public transport system, they're not feeding anything else because there's a lot of short trips. And in almost every one of those communities, having spent a lot of time in Jaipur and Kochi, I'm still looking for the center. You know, most successful public transport systems have a big node at one end. And of course, you see that to a degree in Bangalore, Mumbai, Delhi even. If you don't have a big center, and you're not likely to get one, you do different things than if you have a pretty amorphous, some would use the word sprawl. So, in conclusion, forgive me for pontificating for so long. Number one, start with the problem. Look at alternative solutions. Alternative solutions in terms of what the wheels are made of is the last thing to worry about. Alternative solutions means the shape of that integrated system and the pieces thereof, number one. Number two, spend some time working on governance up front. Not at the end, but up front. If BRT or someone responsible for a quote unquote better bus system is hanging off in outer space with no direct connections to authority, to money, forget about it. And the same thing with Metro. Anyway, I'm done. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's pretty useful. And you know, that's good. You know, start with the problem, not the solution. Build capacities in institutions, governance issues. And I think alternatives analysis is something you have always kind of advocated. That cities
you don't buy a pair of socks without doing it.
Yeah.
But you're buying billion-dollar metros or $100 million BRT systems without doing it. Seems crazy to me.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Sam. and we'll come back to you later. Let me go to Professor Tiwari, ma'am.
Yes, I will start the video also, yes.
Yeah. So ma'am, question to you, again, similar lines. You were kind of part of the, among the first systems in India that came up in Pune and then in Delhi. So what is your take on what happened in both these cities? And what could have been done differently, or what are the things that we can do now in Delhi and in Pune?
It's a very interesting question, Abhijit, especially after listening to previous speakers, because I would say it has taken 25 years to come to full circle. Delhi never started as a specific BRT. As you mentioned, our concept was to improve bus system in Delhi. Delhi already had 625 routes and about 6,000 buses at that time. And so the whole concept evolved not imitating Bogota. In fact, the concept was inspired by Taiwan, Seoul, where they had open systems because they already had extensive bus systems. So Delhi and Pune both never were planned at that time as a new system, a separate route, new buses. It was all thought out as a gradual increment, exactly what Manjula ma'am had talked about just now. It was the whole analysis done in Delhi was, here are these 625 routes. Where is it that we can start thinking about exclusive lane where buses are getting stuck in congestion? It was not about introducing new buses. And then all the other elements, as much as could be introduced, was done. So in fact, the system which started operating, and also to correct Sam, it was a network. 6 kilometer only said that there is exclusive lane, but the buses were not terminating after 6 kilometers. So buses were doing their regular OD and moving in 6 kilometer exclusive lane and then continuing to their final terminal. Of course, even for the pilot, it was 18 kilometers. But I have to say at this point, at almost, I think when the corridor started operating in 2008, the maximum criticism we got from our own colleagues, experts, because it was not a copy of Bogota. It was not a closed system. And I recall even Madhav and ITDP telling us that this is not BRT because you have made it an open system and this is inefficient. So the whole discussion, the government was completely confused because the experts started talking about design issues. And there was so much pressure to the government, including from the World Bank, that this is not BRT. You have to have special buses. You have to have completely different design. It's really interesting that now Manjula ma'am and all of you are talking about the things which were actually written in the report in 1996 for Delhi. So I'm happy that at least now it's been recognized that many Indian cities already have bus system, and what is required is to give priority to buses. And depending on your city and your need and your context, the priority is done in different ways. Of course, when you have arterial roads, all arterial roads have at least 35 meters right of way. And in that, it is very easy to create exclusive bus lane. So that is where you start creating bus lane, but we have to retain the OD which is there, because that is where, you know, network connectivity is coming from there. And also you don't need any external feeder systems. And as Shivanand Swamy also said, that most people come to buses by walking. So all you need is excellent, safe walking spaces. And why bicycle lanes were thought in the first design also, because we do not have any Indian city where you do not have at least few bicyclists. So if on arterial roads, if you're able to create a separate bicycle lane, that improves the efficiency of motorized vehicle lanes. And of course, buses have their own lane. So that whole logic had come from there. And in fact, Enrique Peñalosa came to Delhi after the report had been submitted. And we visited Bogota after the concept was already done. And in the first seminar, we invited Enrique Peñalosa, where he talked about BRT. That was, I think, 2002 or 2003, probably. So from then onwards, the whole debate in India became closed BRT versus open BRT. And closed BRT was associated with all the positives, which is what we are questioning now. And slowly, I think what our understanding was that BRT, which was envisaged as a transport system, a strong network system, slowly morphed into a project. Then we just ended up doing a few kilometers like project. And that's exactly what's happened to metros also in India. Metros are not being done as a network. And in any case, our cities are dense and short trip lengths. So metros are not having the ridership. And yet every single feasibility report of metro shows that it's going to have a large number of trips. And as Sam read out from the newspaper, and there are a lot of reports available that none of the metros have realized the projected ridership. And what I find really fascinating is now that current Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, which was earlier Ministry of Urban Development, where you have listed a whole lot of policies which are going to support metro. So they have a series of projects which are about, so how do we increase ridership in metros which have been constructed? So first you construct a metro based on feasibility report, which shows you millions of trips coming. The trips don't come. And therefore to make those systems viable, you give another series of projects. So what should we do to increase ridership in metro? And not looking into that, your cities are short trips because of mixed land use patterns, because of densities. And many corridors, actually, we don't need more than 20,000 PHPD in peak hour, which is very easily manageable with buses. So I think, I would agree actually exactly what Manjula ma'am said in the beginning. And this is what our concept was, that we have to experiment. And based on our city size and what governments are able to do, start having priority for buses. And when it's going to be on the road, and then how you do the fare integration and how you integrate it with bicycle lanes, etc., that is what is required. So, I mean, actually, just to answer this question, what happens? Is there a future for BRT? Actually, I would like to just share 3 slides, if you permit, quickly.
Yeah, sure.
Let me share my screen and then I'll just open this. Yes. So this is something, the first slide is about Indian city characteristic. All of us know it. This was done about 15, 20 years back. Nothing has changed. We still have relatively low rise development with multiple business districts in most cities. Two-wheeler ownership is very high. So I don't know if Sam, you read, but a lot of papers are also, there are reports coming out that in Lucknow Metro, each trip has to be subsidized by more than 70 rupees. In Delhi also, they need subsidy now because the loan repayment has started. This would not happen in BRT systems. And most cities are expanding in a radial mode and are not likely to develop a highly concentrated single density business district. And cities have mixed land use, so therefore short trips. So if this is the given situation, technically if not buses, what else? And just to give you a little bit of correction in what you also mentioned, actually Delhi BRT did not run into any legal issues. The PIL that was actually, that was filed in the court had given a very strong judgment in favor of BRT. And this I'm showing you the NDTV survey which was done at that time. when there was a lot of criticism about Delhi BRT, but when the users were asked what the views were. But I think the last slide is the most telling slide, and this is what the challenge in front of us is. You see, this is the picture from Times of India. And the caption here is, buses fly on the road as commuters are stuck in a traffic jam on the BRT corridor. So people who are inside the buses, they are not commuters. But every single person who's sitting in a car is a very serious commuter. So eventually that means the whole logic, we started using that we need to design BRT so that the car lanes are not congested. And I think if this is our concept today also, then probably my answer to your question would be that at present, we don't have any future for buses or BRT. Buses will be there because we don't have any other option, but they will continue to be in mixed traffic and all the inefficiencies that come with it. And all our sustainable development policy and sustainable habitat mission and SDG goal 11.2 will remain a distant dream. So I will stop here and then let's take more issues later. I will stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, thanks, ma'am. So very interesting. Point about priority for buses and BRTs is not about segregated corridors, but again, it has to be working as a network. Okay, so we'll come back to some of these points that were raised by the first three panelists. Meanwhile, I would like to go to Madhav. And Madhav, based on your experience of working in Indore, and specifically a point that Sam came up with where he talked about capacity within government to actually implement and manage and run these bus systems. And what I remember is that you actually had somebody, Prashant, actually working inside AICTCL office and helping them to manage it. So can you share a little bit about that and how did it actually help Indore?
Sure, thanks, Abhijit. Just before I go into this, there's 2 or 3 points I do want to make. I mean, since, one, there was this whole question about, so, we've been trying to come up with some jobs density numbers for Indian cities. And, typically, if you look at some of the successful metro rail systems over the world, so say New York has, in Midtown Manhattan, has about 225,000 jobs per square kilometer, right? So, even some, London very consciously as part of their new plan, tried to increase its job density in central London from about 50,000 jobs per square kilometer to 150,000 jobs per square kilometer. Now, the only place in India where, that comes close is Mumbai, which in parts gets to about 30,000, 35,000 jobs per square kilometer. Again, these are estimates because, we are trying to add up informal jobs and formal jobs, right? So, but if you look at Bangalore, even in its densest areas in the pet area and all, you're still like around 10, 12,000 jobs per square kilometer. Very similar numbers in Delhi. So, and it's very distributed. So, we are not going to build CBDs, mainly a lot of the CBDs were like these finance districts, right? And whereas, India has had this very service sector spread out employment. And unless there is a way for us to change that, and because of our land and other issues, it's not impossible. So buses are actually the only way for us to go forward, because for us, transportation is a many-to-many problem. It is not a many-to-one problem, which is bringing people to CBDs and sending them back, right? So this, and I think these jobs density numbers and, are very, very clear that, it is just, you are never going to get anywhere close to the kind of ridership numbers that are getting projected. So I think this is a data point. We are also trying to generate these numbers. They're not that easy to get, but so that's sort of wanted to make that one point. Couple of things I do want to make. I mean, it's not even just bus. Congestion is the issue. We all agree. Buses are stuck in congestion. In Mumbai now we're talking about speeds of 7 and 8 kilometers an hour. I wouldn't think about stepping into a bus. I wouldn't think about stepping into a bus because it goes so slowly. So congestion is an issue. We need to give priority. That's one thing. But the fact is that there is, buses as a mode for, for as a sort of a choice mode for transport. Look at, just forget BRT, look at the transition to cashless, right? The technology has been there. National government has said there is a protocol, there is the mobility card, open access, we have the state of the art. Not one city has made the transition to cashless ticketing. I mean, neither has Bangalore, nor Mumbai, nor Delhi. Nobody has made the transition to cashless ticketing, and there's clearly certain system barriers. So, if we are trying to bring change in buses, there has, it is very clear that we need to find something that's going to be able to politically make the movement and make the change. Now, that is something we have to discover, right? And, in Latin America, providing the dedicated lanes became that sort of lever to really make BRT systems attractive and push the agenda, raise the billions of dollars. So it is very clear, buses are stuck in congestion. We have to give priority, but we also have to figure out a way to improve the image of the buses. And we have to figure out what that is, because until we do that, then it is going to be a losing battle. So anyway, I just wanted to make these 2 points. I mean, the third big issue is that there are the buses. See, even today, I know BMTC, for example, is trying to buy buses. There were some 2,500 buses that were sanctioned 4 years ago, but the manufacturers are not able to supply them the needed buses. I know Delhi has been trying to buy buses. I know BST has been trying to buses, and they are not getting the buses that they need because, we are not even manufacturing the required number of buses. So, I know INHAF is also running this 50 lakh buses, but there are no buses. Where are the manufacturers? So unless there is some dedicated funding in, we make 44,000 buses a year, including, and, most of them go in intercity. There are not enough buses in the country. So I think the other big thing is that how do we, find and produce more buses in the country, and, what kind of maybe national government incentive or a industry creation for buses needs to happen. We just sold, this year we've, I think, sold like 500,000 Tata Magics and some 275,000 Mahindra Maximos, right? And this is what is public transport. So again, how do we actually, so that is another big issue. Is there a way for us, instead of even getting into this, there a way for us to find, to find how we can boost the production? So, I mean, I'm saying 3 things to responding to some of the few questions that, the jobs density data should be developed, because it is clearly showing that, we need that information, that it's very clear that, anything, even metros will not work. And, unless we are able to change that jobs density argument. Second is that we just need to find how can we make buses more attractive, move them to using technology, move them to cashless, and hopefully COVID becomes a good excuse to make the transition to cashless, and priority, whatever. But, just how do we make buses become important in our cities, that the investments that are required get made in buses? Because clearly the last 20 years, they stopped recruiting new officers in state transport institutions in 1988 or something like that. They are just hiring contract employees. There are no actually trained professionals or things like that. So, how do we get that money and sort of, find a way? And then this last point on sort of, this bus manufacturing, I think has to be thought about. I mean, whether it's either, we get a bigger push on the minibus manufacturing if we are to simplify the Contract Carriage Act. And so, we are able to get, the more minibuses like Latin America, all over the world, right? There are minibuses in India, they're missing, partly because it is the 1958 Act of State Transport Undertaking. And that's why then we have ended up with this 7-seater Tata Magics carrying 20 people and serving as public transport. So I think there are these 3 important things that I would say also need to be addressed beyond sort of just talking about the BRTS agenda. Now, coming back to your question. So I think, yeah, I mean, capacity is required. I think, when we started supporting Indore, I mean, really, they had very little capacity. I mean, in terms of untrained capacity to work on bus systems. So I think, I mean, just being able to be there, help analyze the data, bring best practices. Also, I think one of the things we were able to help with was actually create buy-in in a larger circle of decision makers. So whether it's other bureaucrats who are not directly involved in the project, the mayor's office, maybe some senior business leaders in the city, educational institutions. So where we were as experts then were able to go and show or talk about why the project is good. So I think one was the technical aspect where we were able to bring, what I mean, a lot of times we also didn't have the expertise, right? Whether it was branding or whether it was finance, but we were able to at least find the right experts and bring that input. Also, in Indore, they did first time procurements, right? So they got a private operator for the first time. They got a bus which had no history. So in all of those cases also, since these are all things that can be challenged in the court of law, I think having sort of some support, some technical evidence behind sort of those decisions was very useful, so that it gave them the comfort as administration to make some of those decisions. So I think so a lot of those things. So like I said, just technical knowledge on a day-to-day basis to resolve issues that came up. But then one is to create a broader brain for a new concept within the city, the administration. And the third thing was, since they were doing a lot of new things where there was no precedence, and court of law always looks for precedence. So we were able to at least help build some of the necessary technical documentation, paperwork, so that the bureaucrats were able to then comfortably take the decisions that were required to get buses from a new bus manufacturer, to hire a first time bus operator on a gross cost contract, those kinds of things. I mean, it's just that so yeah, I mean, I think so. Anyway, those broadly, I felt like those were the three places that we were able to contribute, and it was clear that the capacity was missing and we were able to bring it. And I think that is, I mean, it's just
Yeah. Thanks, Madhav. That was interesting points you made about the structure of our cities and why we have to plan for many to many and not just to take them from many to the CBD. One of the other points which also came up through a lot of people was the fact that buses are probably not attractive enough right now. So, somebody does not want to get on the bus. Either you are stuck in traffic going at 7 kilometers per hour, or the buses are old, they are run down, they are not attractive enough. People don't want to get into them. Let's also talk with Pranjali, and because Pranjali has been doing a lot of work, especially from the citizens' perspective in Pune. See, one of the things that came up when in the study that Kirti ji and we were doing was, most people said that they are upset or they don't accept the BRT system because the government or the decision makers have not communicated it well to them. So a lot of things that as designers we take for granted, they don't really appreciate that. For them, it is something that disrupts their day-to-day life, something that is now coming in the way. So how did you deal with that in your role in Pune? And how did you work with the government to kind of communicate these messages?
Right. Yeah, so I completely agree that the communication plays a very important role in this entire process, because if you see even in case of Pune, what has happened since pilot BRT to this, recent 45 kilometers of BRT in Pune and Pimpri-Chinchwad. I think initially there was kind of a lack of communication and government reaching out to public or to media, which has created a lot of doubts in people's mind, like whether we need BRT or not, or like the pilot BRT received a lot of criticism from the media also, and no one asked the passengers whether they are happy or not. Everyone asks the car drivers or two-wheeler riders, like, what is your opinion about BRT? Or even if there was a kind of a very small accident happened on the MV lanes on that BRT road, the blame was on the BRT. So I think there was a huge communication gap. But it's good that the city learned from its own mistakes. And of course, thanks to the strong ecosystem which Pune has got of these NGOs, they were quite supportive of the BRT as a concept. I'll not comment on the what design, and what kind of operations, etc. But as a concept, the NGOs were of strong, they were supporting this BRT. They were constantly pushing to the corporation that you need to expand your pilot and you cannot just leave it like that. And as a result of it, when the city took kind of a pause for 3-4 years, and then again they launched the next corridor. But at that time, because of the learnings from the earlier corridor, the city improved some of their mistakes, especially in case of communication. They started with this communication process, reaching out to public, reaching out to schools, talk to media frequently, and media also learned a lot from their own mistakes, because media also agreed that city needs priority for buses, and for that we have BRT. And when we speak about BRT or write about BRT, we should be sensible enough so that the blame on XYZ thing on BRT corridor should not be on the buses, but it should be dealt with in a very sensitive manner. And in this entire process, the city also had agencies to do the communications and branding of this BRT system. And to start with, the city started with INREACH activity. INREACH is like, because the corporation realized that their own engineers don't know about BRT well. They're just doing it as a project, or the PMPM is just thinking about operating buses on it, but they are not talking to each other the way they should talk. And before outreach, the city conducted an event of InReach, where there was a kind of a very good communication platform which was created between different agencies, also traffic police, etc., so that whatever message the city wants to put, it should be uniform, or whatever message the PMPML is putting, it should be in line with the message which PMC is putting to the media. So these were some of the initiatives which were taken care by Pune. And now also, I think if you see the way media is writing about BRT, they are very positive about it. So whenever they write about anything on negative thing on the BRT or of the buses, they make sure that the message is like, we want BRT, but we want the improvement in the BRT. So this is a progress, or I have seen over last 10-15 years in the mindset of people or media. Of course, I'd say that it's not the best BRT in the country. There are a lot of things to improve in case of Rainbow BRT or the pilot BRT. But the good thing is that because of the strong ecosystem, the city is continuing to expand the BRT. And also, initially you spoke about the metro corridors putting on the BRT corridors, and because of that they have dismantled or demolished some of the BRT stations. Yeah, so it has become a very common fact that every city wants the metro corridor, and then they go to the metro company and ask, can we do metro or not? So it's like taking your son to the toys shop and ask the shopkeeper, can my son play with the toys or not? So answer is yes. So you go to the metro corporations and tell them, we want to do DPR for the metro, and then they do it. Similar case happened with Pune. No one thought that, okay, there is BRT, why do you need one more metro corridor on the same corridor? But of course, whatever has happened has happened. There were court cases also against this conflicting rapid systems. But now the decision is like, we'll have both. We'll retain BRT as well as we'll have metro on the same corridor. So now when I see this from NGO angle, or like from maybe a technical person who is working like a committee member of this BRT or the NMT with cities, I'll say that maybe it's an opportunity for the city. You have BRT and metro on the same corridor, just ban private vehicles there. Just make sure that you have maximum restrictions on that corridor on private vehicles, so that you get success for both, and then these two systems will not work as competition to each other, but they will work as competition to the private vehicle. So this is how the city needs to change the approach. And I hope that the Pune will also start thinking on same manner, and they will have maximum restrictions on that corridor. And again, the good thing is, because of the ecosystem in Pune, even if the metro has demolished some of the BRT stations, the agreement is that they will rebuild those stations. I'll not comment here on the public money, etc., etc. But at least after 3 years, the corridor will be redone. So the bus commuters will be again on the same, they will experience the same thing which they were experiencing 2 years back. So yeah, this is my comment on the communications and how city has changed its own mindset over last couple of years.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Pranjali. I'll just come back to a comment that Sam had made. Well, Sam talked about capacities to actually implement and even run these systems. And even my experience working in some of the cities has been that cities are simply not equipped enough to manage and operate these systems. There is some, I can see something better probably in Karnataka, where DULT works, where, for example, NWKRTC already had a very good resource and they could manage to run their systems. But that does not hold true for every place in India. Now, in case we want to upscale capacities in India of the cities to actually manage and run, because private consultants or universities will not be able to do it forever and ever. What are the next things that we could do? So I'll again go back to Manjula ma'am about building capacities in cities and how that could be done.
So, so there are two type of capacity. One is actually planning, designing something, whether it is even in terms of bus system and planning how the bus system would run, etc. The other is in terms of implementing daily management of the operations and so on. I think right now, even in our various organizations, you mentioned NWKRTC and so on, they have good experience of implementing, running the bus operations. But in terms of planning, in terms of getting this, analyzing the data, in terms of, on the basis of the data, fine-tuning their services, operations, they lack the capacities. So we need to really, improve the capacities in that. The second point is sometimes when you are well entrenched and you've been running the operations for a few years, you also become very, not very open to new ideas. Like you've been running something in a particular manner, you would like to run in the same manner. So there has to be a change. Has to be a willingness to, based on evidence, based on data, to look at how you are performing and to change course if required. So this would definitely require not just having a cadre of transport professionals, but in terms of exposing them to best practices, in terms of training them. And this is where I felt, the LUTP program that Government of India had, it was good, but it was only for the top level. You were only exposing, taking people at the top, senior bureaucrats or senior level people. And then but you are not doing so to the people who are actually working in a depot or, at various levels. So I think what we need is a proper capacity building, which is continuous at that level, at the level where the cutting edge is, so that people at that level understand, even if they are not able to themselves plan, they at least understand there is a need to plan. There is something wrong happening. There is a need for rectification and they're able to take help. So I think consistent capacity building is something which we need to invest in, and which is something we need to do. Otherwise, there would be an issue. And the other issue, sorry.
Yeah, especially you're saying at the middle level or even below that, not only at the top level.
Yeah, I'm talking about the middle level and the below levels, because these are the people. A depot manager is the one who is, kind of controlling or operating at that level. And we need him to think, not just thinking, his role is what has been defined for him. So I definitely feel there is a necessity not just to create a cadre, but to keep investing and ensuring their professional competence improves over a period of time. Otherwise, it becomes very, very difficult. And right now, there will be still areas where the transport companies will be dependent on consultants, because new things keep happening. For example, ITS, and you don't expect any transport company or an operator to have any capacity to deliver or plan or design ITS related initiatives. So that is capacity building at the level of transport operators. But I think there's another is capacity building of consultants themselves is sometimes lacking. So what happens is that even the consultants don't have that field experience of doing something. So it is always easy to read or see that something is done somewhere, in other place, but to actually to replicate it, you need to have your own experience of having done that somewhere, committed mistakes, learn from the mistakes. So that is also lacking. And I think overall, we need to really invest on capacity building.
Okay, ma'am, got that. One other question that came up from almost all of the panelists, or a remark, is that we need to make buses and BRT attractive. So can we kind of very briefly, and I think I'll go to each panelist and quickly ask them a couple of points that they think could be done to make BRT and buses more attractive. So I'll start with Pranjali. Pranjali, what do you think could be done? How do we make buses in BRT attractive?
Yeah, I think it's a very valid question, and I completely agree that it has to be very attractive because the way private motor vehicles are changing, they are become more and more attractive, and that's the reason people are getting more attracted towards them. Similarly, if we don't make our bus system attractive, people will not feel to board the bus. Even in Pune or even in many cities now, we are we can see that the debate is happening whether there should be AC buses or not. Forget about whether I like AC buses or not, but the fact is, if people like, if they want, if they see AC bus as an attractive bus, if they feel that electric bus is an attractive bus because it gives you a smooth ride, then why not? Why not invest in a very attractive system which can attract people from two-wheelers? I'll not say four-wheelers directly, because there are many cities which have mode share by two-wheeler, where the mode share by two-wheelers is very high. So first thing is to attract them, and before attracting more people, the regular commuters, the regular passengers on bus, they should also get a very nice experience when they board the bus. Because if the buses are not in a good condition, and they are you are not reaching on time, the buses breakdown rate is very high, they will also sometime switch to the private vehicles. So I think in general, we should have attractive buses. Maybe electric buses is also one of the ways to achieve it, because in recent experience, Pune is flying more than 100 electric buses, and the immediate thing we observed is like passengers initially were like, are these PMPML buses? Should I board this bus or not? Because they look so different. The terms and conditions to the private operators are written in such a nice manner that the buses are clean, they need to be maintained, their penalty rates are very high, and when you board the bus, the ride is very smooth. It's also AC bus, so it's a completely different image that has these buses are showing. So I think if that's the way any city feels that that's the way of branding, great. I mean, they can go for that. And if the cities which have BRT, they should also think about upgrading the BRT, maybe by upgrading BRT stations, again, the upgrading buses. If they don't have onboard fare collection, they can go for that. So it should never stop. I mean, the upgradation process should never stop. And yeah, so I agree that it has to be very attractive.
Yeah, and when I'm saying how do we make it attractive, sometimes it can also be by making private transport less attractive.
Yeah.
Right. So, there has to be some disincentive for people to not use their own vehicle.
And
Yeah,
it should be happen at the same time. The moment you make buses attractive, you should immediately start it. It cannot be, let the city get 3,000 buses and then only you can start parking management. It should happen together. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, Madhav.
Look, I mean, it is in a city, it's a political moment. I think whatever, if you're bringing some capital to do a BRT, whether it's through a loan, through a multilateral development agency, whether it's a national government grant. So, I mean, it has to become something sizable. And I think so, in the end, we need to make it attractive and we need to capture whatever political moments are there. I mean, of course, there has to be a longer term plan in place, but, all of the small victories have to be had, because you can want the system and you will never have it, right? So, you have to work in the political economy. You have to figure out what are the small battles that you're going to win, which are going to change the image and possibly then really capture those moments. But, there are very few people inside the government who actually have the incentives to do that. Manjula ma'am is probably an exception. I mean, I've not met, and I think that is really the challenge. I mean, it's then it sort of asks people like us who are shouting, but I do think that really, I think we have to accept it is a political economy challenge. We have to think about the moments. We have to think about what will create the moments, whether it's a fleet renewal, whether it's moving to electrification, whether it's bringing some capital investment. And I think the capital so that way, that's why BRT was good, because it was a way to bring capital investment and bring attention, that at least 200 crores was enough to get some excitement in the officials about buses. Otherwise, it's a routine issue and nobody is bothered about it and it goes on. So how do we create a 200 crore, project versus a 2000 crore project, which excites them even more when it's the metro, and then capture it, where then we can bring the additional pieces of a big systems perspective in, so that you can really take advantage of this capital investment to then do all of the other improvements, which probably cross 20 crores, but nobody is doing them because right now that doesn't have the attention. So how do you actually create that whatever 200 crore moment for buses in our cities, and then make sure that you drive all of the other change that is required, whether it's better training for officers, training for your all of those kinds of things. So I mean, anyway, that's sort of my thinking.
Yeah, thanks Madhav. I'll go to Professor Tiwari, and I have another question for you, ma'am. One of the things that I was discussing with Parisar a year back was the fact that the metro has a policy, there is an act. Do you think something similar should be there for the BRTS, where it is difficult for the government to simply say one day, let's remove this? It should not be that easy for a government to say, let's remove the BRTS, let's dismantle it. So do you think an act or something about the BRTS would be a good idea?
I guess it's a good idea. I mean, basically, I have been discussing that central government has a metro policy, but why not a public transport policy, which is inclusive of buses and metro. And the original logic for having metro policy is because you need large amount of funds, which the states and cities do not have. So central government has to manage the external loans. But now we see that similar thing is applied to buses also. Because even for buses, our municipalities and cities do not have money. And there is no assured market. So earlier, Madhav was talking about, where are the buses? The thing is that, we have two large manufacturers who export buses to many other countries. But since there is no reliable market in the country, so there has been no innovation in buses by these manufacturers. And when cities ask for buses, those buses are missing. So I think very important thing is to create that market, or I would say demand for buses. There is a need for buses, undoubtedly, BRT or non-BRT. And if we have to create that market, then the state has to intervene. State meaning government, central government. And one starting point is that let's all, actually argue for having a public transport policy, which is inclusive. So some places you will need metro and BRT and buses all. And in smaller cities, perhaps you will need only BRT and buses, and sometimes only buses. So we should have a public transport policy where these things are laid down, because even interestingly enough, of course, there is political economy also, because even metro policy says that do alternative analysis. But every single city, when they start asking for metro, there is no alternative analysis. So I guess we have to realize that, that's the reality of a politics, political economy. And I think now we have to therefore start looking into this, having a dedicated public transport. And what I also would like to, just point out, that even today, without any major investment, last 6-7 years, there has been hardly any investment in buses, but we are not running empty buses. We are running full buses. In fact, we are running slightly uncomfortable buses because they are crowded and they are unreliable. So there is every reason to, when you say improve image or bring in new buses, all it needs is, earlier Sam talked about institutions and dedicated policy and basically a roadmap which assures manufacturers that yes, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, if they invest in upgrading manufacturing of buses, there is a market for it, and they can easily do it. They already have the know-how. So I think a lot of seriousness has to investment in terms of policies and in terms of arranging finances has to come from the government.
The central government, right?
Yes. Yeah, because states don't have enough money.
Yeah, but okay, I got that. So I'll just take on from that statement.
Could I jump in on this?
Yes, Sam, please go ahead.
I want to agree with Professor Tiwari 1,000%. There should not be a BRTS policy. There should not be a metro policy. There should be a public transport policy. But having a policy that's not linked to money is not exactly going to do a whole lot. So if you have a policy that says if you don't do an alternatives analysis, adjudicated by an independent board of experts, by the way, you don't get the money. It doesn't matter what it's for, but if you don't have a satisfactory basis for spending money on a metro in particular, on BRTS, however defined, or on improving a bus system, there's no money that's forthcoming from the central government, whether it's the guarantees by a state bank, which is a back door to get money without asking any questions. I've been looking at these DPRs now for 20 years, and they're terrible generally for metros. I saw one that was 12 pages long for $1 billion. Talk about alternatives analysis. The word feasibility study is sort of silly. I won't say what the institution or the individuals, but they're a joke. And nobody is being held accountable, by the way, for the difference between ridership forecasts and actuals. Professor Swamy actually did a beautiful study of that, and I don't know how much publicity it got, but that's number one. Let me clarify something. Forgive me, I was sitting here barely able to contain myself. When I talk about defining the problem, I start with demand. Travel demand, what's existing demand and what's likely to be. From that flows a service plan. You don't start with it's a closed system, or you don't start with it's an open system. You start with a service plan, usually in a corridor. And from the service plan flows the hardware, as opposed to assuming a service plan, whatever it might be, and then assuming the gold standard for the hardware. The last point I want, so demand for, let's call it demand analysis, existing demand and future demand is the starting point for defining what these things end up looking like. And the emphasis, of course, has to be on system and integration, and trips begin at home and they end at, or wherever, and end at a destination. They don't start and begin. So when I said the BRT was 6 kilometers long, the fact of the matter, it was not 6 kilometers long. It was as far out as the service plan on it served. The last point I wanted to make is when we began, when I first came to the bank formally in 2005, I was aghast that there was no capacity building program. And one of the things Ajay Kumar, O.P. Agarwal in India was really part of the gang there, we noticed was that a lot of people who were involved in public transport really didn't have any formal background in public transport. Many of the people were highway engineers. Not that that's a bad thing, but if the service plan, knowing about branding, operations, and management are key, that wasn't something they knew. So the first big capacity building effort by the World Bank, and it began with a sort of an experimental session in, of all places, indoor in 2007, was a training program. And the name of the training program is Introduction to Public Transport, Planning, Operations, and Management. No hardware in there. And that went on for about 4 years. But when OP came, he rightly said, let's focus a little bit on leaders and policy, because if we have the leaders and policy down, then they'll recognize the need for capacity building and the more of the technical details. But the bank was unwilling to finance both. We were like pariahs in the bank. And if I were looking at the need for a formal capacity program started by the central government, it would be to resurrect this basic, whatever you want to call it, public transport operations planning and management for, you know, mid-level management, not top political and or administrative leaders. Anyway, I'm done.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Sam. I'll take it to Professor Swamy now. Sir, one of the very important initiatives that you were involved in is the Leaders in Urban Transport program, right? That was done with the World Bank and MOHUA. How do you see taking this LUTP forward, but taking something from what Manjula ma'am said about, training some other category of people? And let me add to that. How about also looking at the LUTP as a means to train the political side? Because ultimately they may probably be the decision makers. So do you think there is a possibility of, taking the LUTP forward in that way?
Thank you. Abhijit, there are a few other things, if you permit me, I'd like to state, and then I'll come to this. I know the time is essence. One, I think we did a brief study on metro systems and their performance, as well as some BRT systems. What was interesting was, in case of metro, invariably ridership forecast and actual realization was only up to 30% or less. That's number one. But more important thing, both in case of metro as well as BRT, where did they come from? What was their previous mode? 90 to 95% of them were using bus. And therefore, you want ridership on any new systems, you have to have a very strong bus as a base. In what form, how you develop that bus is the next question, I think, which we should understand, think about it, how we want to develop. There are two examples of differential form of bus systems. One, I would like to quote from Surat, where we have a BRT, we have a high mobility corridor, we have a city bus system. High capacity, high frequency, moderate capacity, moderate frequency, and then the low capacity, and then standard frequency, about 8 minutes or so. I think that's the way we have done it. But what is interesting is, you are, because of the technology, you are, and then with one or two station overlap, you are able to connect the entire three systems, convert them into one system for a passenger. He can convert in one ticket, one fare structure from one bus to other bus to other bus, other systems, without actually paying any more benefit. I think that's an important thing. It is a possibility that you can have multiple systems operating with different principles, but put it together, you can have one system. And that's what I thought. I think Hubli Dharwad, again, madam, initially, as you know, there were plans for trunk as well as a feeder systems. Feeder system was forgotten for a while by the people who had taken over, and with madam coming in, that's also got activated, and they will soon be starting a feeder system. I think the fare integration, all of that is also a matter of time. That is going to happen in the next few months, I would think. Madam is there. I'm sure she'll. I think this is one part of it. Therefore, need over space is going to vary, and therefore you need to create systems. Bus is the best flexible system. You can talk about it. And a paradox which I would like to say, there are cities which are looking at something called a neo metro. It's a trolley bus again. Okay. And metro is cut up, and therefore they're talking about neo metro, but it's a trolley bus. Yeah. And what we should not forget, I think even Madhav also highlighted, it is micro. The times are for the micro. Whether you talk about Uber, whether you talk about Ola, whether you talk about other forms of micro-transit systems, and therefore bus has to have a series of connected systems like microbus to biarticulated, whatever series of buses, and that's what we need to look at for different cities. In terms of financing, depending on the central or state, all of that part of it, I think that cannot go on and on and on because of the way our political system works. We need to create something locally. If there is a good property tax base which is working in system, we need to introduce a property tax as part of it, transport tax. Like you pay for water, like you pay for other things, you need to pay for transport tax, and that becomes a source of funding. Not just that users pay, but the beneficiaries need to pay, and beneficiaries pay through property tax system. And that's the way to look at the whole system there. Coming to two more things. One more important thing is the pricing part of it. We look at pricing, be it metro or be it BRT or even the bus system. We are looking at it from the cost recovery perspective. We should be looking at it from the demand mobilization strategy. Okay, in Kerala, you have private buses running with 70 paisa per passenger kilometer. You have in many parts of the city 1 rupee 70 paisa per kilometer. Metros, you charge them 2 rupees 50 paisa per passenger kilometer. Why should passengers pay such differential fares? Therefore they will look for some other alternative, and that's an important thing. We need to look at it and convert all the capital investment requirements into gross costs or the fare part of it. Coming to the leaders part of it, I think it's a wonderful program supported by Sam, OP, Madam, and the Government of India, the World Bank. I think it went on very well, and it's something which is being considered for continuation both within the Government of India, and also there is some modified version coming up with the support of GIZ right now, GIZ and Government of India. There is a discussion on that. The change which is being discussed right now, earlier it was more for leaders and more what you call kind of a discussion oriented exposure kind of a focus with project and with foreign visits. This program is, we are titling it more on a experiential learning. Therefore, you talk about a concept, people go and see it within their city and what can be done and come back. I think that is a kind of a perspective with which the discussion is on, and hopefully that should get announced during UMI in November this year. Yeah, and look, it's a, while we discuss all of it, yeah, if BRT, Ahmedabad, Surat, all of these things happened, there was a political leader, there was an administrator, there was an institution which was interested in doing some interesting work, and all of them could see through the whole part of it there. And so also in Hubli Dharwad in Karnataka, if you go to small towns and cities in Karnataka, even Bellary where I come from, Sindanur where I come, where we go to very oftenly, there are bus systems which are working, and therefore transport is supply creates its own demand. If you are willing to supply, demand will come up, and therefore 3 or 4 conditions are important. One is when you go to the street, major street, buses must be visible. If the buses are not visible, that means people look for other options, and therefore the density of buses on the streets have to go up significantly. Okay, whichever road hierarchy you are talking about. Number 2, your bus system must be understandable. Okay, everywhere high level frequency may not be possible. Therefore, I go here from there to there, from there to there. Okay, that kind of a easily understandable kind of a system and signage and everything else also needs to be developed. That's number 2. And number 3, my fare collection, I don't have to pay and change is there, not there. We not have to fight with the person who issues the ticket. I just have to, smart cards or whatever other digital part of it have to be encouraged, okay, for people to adopt. Okay, some bit of force, some bit of encouragement, I think that will work very well there. Number 4, if I get into the bus, okay, people there, like the aircraft, welcome, don't have to say welcome, at least give a smile. Don't frown at us. I think the behavior of the staff is very critical. Therefore, we need to actually make them also, the people who come and become drivers and conductors, they need to have self-respect. They need to feel proud of whatever they are doing. I think that's an important thing. How do we bring about that change is also very, very important. And of course, regularity and then accessibility, all of those are known parts. Fit safety, those are known. But if these four things are done, I'm sure people will come back to bus, and people are on bus in most cities. I don't know if Madam might throw some light on it. There is a lot of difference between the south and the north. South, people still get on to bus. The moment you get into Maharashtra and cross Maharashtra, and things change, and then the western part and the middle part is changed, then the north it changes. There is a cultural factor, also something which we need to keep in mind while discussing. Thank you. Probably I took time. Sorry. Yeah.
No, it's fine, sir. Thank you so much. I just have a request for Radhika. Is it possible to unmute one of the attendees, specifically Ranjit?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Ranjit, are you there?
Give me a second, I'll unmute him.
Yeah.
You're talking about Ranjit Gadgil, sir?
Ranjit Gadgil, yeah.
I think
Hi, hello.
Yeah, hi.
So Ranjit, rather than asking your question for you, I thought it's best you ask that question, specifically the policy versus act that you were talking about.
Yes, I mean, one of the things, as you mentioned earlier, is that I think that having a legal act has really worked to Metro's benefit. And I'm just trying to compare what has worked for Metro versus BRT. And one of the things, of course, other than the funding, is of course this legal backing, and that makes a difference in terms of many of the things that have been discussed today. Just defining service level benchmarks, having safety standards in place, that was an impediment here in Pune. Just having a regulatory mechanism which is often built into an act. And I think a policy just doesn't address a lot of these things. And so I think one of the things that we're saying is that should we all sort of learn from our experiences and try to build this this act. Of course, getting an act passed in Parliament is not easy, but at least we could take our first steps towards it. And I think what wasn't perhaps addressed as much by the panelists, and is also an interesting thing to note, is that a lot of the opposition to the BRT has really come from the fact that it seems to take away space from vehicles. And the Metro has done, I guess, a remarkable job in trying to assuage that fear, especially amongst politicians, that no, we will not be taking away road space from vehicles, from cars and two-wheelers. And in fact, we've seen a lot of road building alongside or on top of the Metro pillars. And these are just some of the things that we have to be aware of as we try to revive BRT, if at all that's going to be possible.
Yeah, thanks, Ranjit. I think that's very relevant. I think one of the points that I had mentioned in the presentation was this entire fear amongst people that it takes away space. And, when we were when I was working with Madhav in Indore, one of the things that happened was that they widened the road first, and then they did not segregate it for the BRTS for a couple of years. So by the time they decided to segregate it, people were already protesting. Because they probably forgot that earlier that road was extremely narrow. I think even Professor Swamy will recollect the same thing happening in Ahmedabad, where people tend to have short memories about this. And probably one of the things that I could take away from this is, we used to say very proudly in Ahmedabad, maybe in Surat, in Indore, that we are giving back to the private transport, the private vehicles, even better than what we took from them. Maybe sometimes that becomes an obstacle, because people then, at some point, if you have to give back less, then people react, protest. And because our lesson is that they protest even if you give them more, because a few years later, they want that space also. But yeah, thanks, Ranjit, for bringing that up.
Abhijit,
yeah.
More than all of this, I think for urban streets, we need to put in a street section with transit ready streets, all urban roads,
of different sizes will have transit in the middle, 8 meters, 7.5 or 9 meters. I think that becomes an IRC practice standard code which gets implemented all across. I think that's probably what is required.
That's it. That's my dream, sir, to one day have people quote IRC for BRT like that.
Yes.
Wherever we
It
go to
has to
design
be part
street.
of the development plan or the master plan, then only it will get implemented.
Probably. I think in Ahmedabad, in the integrated mobility plan, this was part of the sections, but it didn't become part of the DP. I think the point is, how do we make it under an act so that some things at least are non-negotiable? I think that is the larger issue here. Anyway, I think we are kind of running close to 6:30. Kirtiji, do you have anything to add? Because you are also very interested in BRTS. So anything that you want to address? I have tried to take a lot of the questions that the audience had. I hope I've answered, or the panelists have answered most of them. For those of whom I could not take these questions, I'm sorry. But we will try to answer them through some other means. Kirtiji, are you there? Yeah.
Yeah. It's getting late, but I think, in terms of 2 hours, we still have 8 minutes, and then I think we could stretch another few minutes. So I essentially have two things to do. One is to thank everyone for being here and being so wonderful. That I will do. But then other thing is to try and comment on this entire debate that has taken place for two reasons. One is that this is part of a fairly exhaustive entire series we are running of 30 webinars. And there is a great need to reconnect this entire exercise with what we're doing and why we are doing it. But let me first thank all of you. So first is, of course, Professor Abhijit Lokre. This is a very thoughtful, you asked many questions. There was a deep probing that took place. And also it was very highly practical. It was not, I think, about the ground. So it was exceedingly interesting discussion. And thank you very much. Also, thank you very much for very smooth and effortless moderating that you do. Thank you very much. We're really very grateful. We also are very blessed with an incredibly rich panel. It's hard to get such 6-7 people at one place. And I must take this opportunity to thank each one of them. A good number of them I know personally, a few of them I do not. But let me thank Manjula ji. Thank you very much for coming, ma'am. Mrs. Sam Zimmerman. I've heard about you but never met you. But thank you for being here and being so wonderfully frank and insightful. Of course, Professor Shivanand Swamy, I think you get to see him much less. But it's a great joy to have you again in this session. Dr. Geetam Tiwari, thank you very much for being here and being so forthright. Madhav, we're going to catch you again in the next 2-3 weeks' time to do something else. So thank you very much for being here. And of course, Pranjali ji, you've been very helpful in organizing this entire series. We're sorry we're missing Sujit. He's not well, and I think, had he been here, he would have also brought in an enormous amount of wisdom to this particular discussion. Let me kind of tell you, I also must be grateful not only to the panelists, but to the partners, because each webinar that we've arranged has arranged with a series of partners. And this mobility, this seminar essentially is an exception that we organized not 1, 2, 3, but 4 webinars. And we had wonderful partners in Parisar, Sumnet India, CEE, Urban Labs, and of course INHAF. So very many thanks for your partnership. I also, in my thank you business, I must thank my colleagues who have been extremely, I think, proactive, helpful, done huge amount of work behind the scene and made this possible. And therefore, I'm once again grateful to Dr. Hariharan, Radhika, Shimul, Elika, Neeta, all of them who made this possible. So thank you very much. So this takes care of my thank you part. But there is also a small little announcement part which I should make, and that is that the next webinar takes place on 9th. That also is a part of the mobility webinar. It is called Cities, People, and Sustainable Mobility. That's the 4th of the series, and will be anchored by Sanskriti Manan. Kindly come and participate. It's only on 9th, today is 6th. So please, and that's the last one in this whole series on mobility seminars. Now, having done this, let me come back to a few things, and I'm given to taking a lot of long time, but this time I'll do it very quickly. And that is this, I'm a bit disappointed in the sense that I would have very much liked one of the panelists as a commuter or someone who's not an expert. Problem with all expert, I think they take thing in a direction. And therefore, I just want to make a few comments very quickly, not as an expert because I don't know the subject, but it so happens that I've been working with Professor Lokre for the last 2.5 years on this BRTS. And we are trying to kind of put together a citizens report, a bottom-up report on system and institution on BRTS, both for Pune and Ahmedabad. And the process, to learn something. So keeping that in mind, I just wanted to kind of share very quickly a few things. Number one, so far public transport is concerned, that as bus, the viable, affordable, workable, people-centering mode of transport, and BRTS as a preferred, relatively modern, relatively comfortable, and more efficient mode of transport. It seems that on both of these, we seem to be losing out. That is the kind of message that one got today. It's very clear that Metro, despite its heavy investment and many other disadvantages, is gaining upper hand. And it appears that powerful market forces and many other political processes are essentially giving it an upper hand. Now, in Ahmedabad, BRTS, despite its prestige, we all know, has a stagnant ridership, and Professor Lokre talked about that. In Pune, they time and again we go and talk about it. They say it's virtually given up on BRTS. So there are some new opening now. OMTS had Ahmedabad, a very glorious chapter that is behind it and is struggling. And the question that we need to ask collectively, and this is the kind of question which I needed to ask, that can we really afford this? Can we afford BRTS not working? Can we afford bus system not really kind of, getting on? And question also is, are we doing enough to argue the case of the bus? Are we looking for better solutions? Are we inventing better options? And answer, looking at the outcome, evidently not. That there is so much more to be done by the professionals, by the experts, by the civil society, by concerned professionals to see that we do not lose out on the bus. It's very important in the context of our cities. Second thing is not only BRTS, even if you really kind of talk about overall bus scenario, and there's a campaign, 50 buses to a lakh population, and that campaign is telling us while we're talking about 50, there are not even 5 buses. And which are there also are concentrated in few cities. So large number of cities in the countries are without buses. And this obviously must change and must change very fast. The third thing that I like to say as a layman, I heard this in a webinar last week on BRTS in Ahmedabad. I think the manager of BRTS who was there in the meeting talked about 5 attributes of BRTS. He talked about last mile connectivity. He talked about good and high frequency. He talked about safe environment. He talked about affordable cost to everyone. And of course, he talked about parking. And I think this is something that we must examine and see that it happens in our cities. My next point, something that we have been laboring on for the last 2.5 years, it's very, very important that a bottom-up perspective, a people's perspective, a user's perspective, feedback on the system becomes available to the city, to the people who manage system and run the service. It is very little available, and there's a great need to invest in that, and it's not happening enough. And my last 2 points are this, and this is something obviously couldn't come in a meeting like this, but transport and housing link is absolutely a must. If we really want cities to work, if we want all these millions of houses being built in cities to be occupied and used, is absolutely essential that viable transport link is set up along with the housing. That is the only thing that will make land available, that will make land affordable, and that would remove land as a major bottleneck to the whole thing. My 6th point is this, that if you want cities to work, not only ordinary people will have to work, not only they will have to work comfortably, affordably, and effortlessly, but the poor people will have to work in our cities. It's almost a precondition for inclusive cities. And as we know very well, it's not happening enough. It is not happening adequately. In many cases, it's not happening at all. And the last point is this, that we cannot look at model shift only in the context number, and how many shifted. We have got to look at this in the context of seeing city as a holistic system, that cities are getting more and more unequal. Privilege will demand more and more privileges and spaces. And the society and polity will offer it. And this is a very costly business. And therefore, if we want our system to be inclusive, and if you want our systems to be less unequal, it's also important that our public system, public transport system work, they remain affordable, and they start performing as early as possible. These are some observations of a layperson, but thank you very much for this opportunity. And thank you, all of you, for being here and making such an incredibly rich webinar. Thank you, Sharad Mahajan, for coming up and introducing the whole meeting. Thank you very much. We are very